Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Security Repo Podcast. Unfortunately, this week, I'm not joined by our new and awesome co-host, Kazar. He unfortunately got called away last minute, but he sends his regards to all you out there and hopes you all like and subscribe anyway. This week, we have a very awesome guest that I met recently at a DevOps Days in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Really underrated community, in my opinion. Great place to visit. Beautiful, beautiful town. And he is Michael Harrison. He's a geek tweaking the status quo. He's a long storied career. We're going to get into all of that as we go through this conversation, but welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, actually.
Good to see you again. So back at DevOps Days Chattanooga, you gave a really interesting Ignite talk. For those of you who don't know about DevOps Days and Ignite talks, these are short 5-minute presentations, but they're jam-packed with information. 20 slides. They progress every 15 seconds. And the speaker really has to be on top of their game to stay up with the slides and still get their point across and make it memorable. And Michael, I got to say, you did that extremely well. One of the better talks of the entire day, no matter how long the talks were. And
good, because I was terrified and don't remember it at all.
Well, those are the best performances when you get off stage and you realize, like, I did it. And then everybody's like, that was amazing. And then you're like, I don't really remember what I did. I know that feeling pretty well. I've been an improviser for a long time. And the best shows are the ones that people tell me were the best shows, but I don't really remember them. But anyway, my point is that you gave this talk about running your own email.
Yeah.
So without getting into the how up front, just why would you want to run your own email in the world where you get free email from, a billion different providers out there?
Well, okay, two reasons. One, the private one is I have my own domains and mail server, and I run a mailing list for Chugalug, the Chattanooga Unix new Android Linux users group, and have for 20 some years. And mailing lists are a thing that Google groups and all that are just honestly a pain. And so I actually wrote my own mailing list server for it, and run that personally. And then for business, RingU specifically, one of my projects is a telecom company, and we send an insane amount of, guess what, faxes, voicemails, and other stuff. And we were running into limits at Google and Gmail. We use Gmail for the web interface for the tech support guys and normal day-to-day stuff, but you can't send more than 2,000 messages per mailbox per 24 hours on that. And we were slamming that across multiple mailboxes and all right, it's time to run our own mail server again. And that gave us a lot of power and flexibility to send email. Basically, Gmail, Google, and Yahoo is where most of our customers are. And those guys all fight each other. There have been outages where Outlook just decides to not accept mail from Gmail for any reason, just I think basically to be mean.
A lot of good points there, but I want to go back to something you said pretty early on there. You send a lot of faxes.
Yeah.
Who's getting faxes?
Okay, so when we started RingU 8 years ago, Phil and I went, and we don't have to do fax anymore. This is going to be a piece of cake. Because I've done a lot of stuff with faxes. Guess what? The medical world, specifically the insurance world, pharmacies, and one Amish woodworking company send an insane amount of faxes. And the reason the woodworking company does is the Amish will treat a received fax like a piece of mail. They go to a local post office place and pick up printed out faxes and for orders for furniture, and that's mailed to them.
That's a whole rabbit hole I don't think we should go down on this podcast. But no, the medical and insurance, that kind of makes sense, but at the same time, like...
Yeah, we got doctors' offices that send 50-page faxes all day long.
Wow.
Yeah, and we've talked to them about email. And the problem is the insurance companies and all that, that is the way they want to receive information. I think probably because they really don't want to receive that information, don't want to pay out that bill. I think they're using fax as a barrier to a web form where you would just upload the stuff. Securely, safely, securely.
Well, I guess that's a not a question I was anticipating asking, but is faxing more secure than email? Like,
Oh God, no.
I didn't think so.
but the fallacy is, so let me explain in the telecom industry, the telecoms charge per page per fax. So, and I don't know what the current rate is. We don't do this, but most of them charge like a penny or two a page to send a fax. And the whole industry loves it because it's a revenue source. I have a competitor that I've seen their fax bill because it got mailed to the wrong person, and I just about blew my top. It was insane, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a day in fax charges. But no, it's not secure. It's easy to intercept. Um, most of it goes through a protocol now called T38. It's arguably secure, but it gets transposed by multiple parties to go from fax machine to fax machine. And the really fun part is the insurance companies aren't actually using fax machines either. It's all software. But it takes about a minute a page.
That's
mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. I did not think we'd be talking about faxes today because I wanted to really dig in on the whole email thing, but
yeah.
Wow, the security of faxing. So if you really want someone to get a paper document in a secure way, like one, you could just hand it to them in person, and that's guaranteed.
Yes.
I think I have faith in the U.S. postal system.
I do too. They're actually really good.
They're really good, but faxes would have been third before today's conversation, and not so much now.
So I've had talks with people about setting up email accounts that get swept and printed, and that's, for the average small doctor's office, pharmacy, whatever. We do a lot of vet clinics and all that. That's just over their head. They're like, "What? Yeah, man, I can make you or sell you a box that receives email, and if there's a PDF in the email, it just goes to the printer." What? And the really nice multifunction machines will do that anyway.
Right on. Well, let's get back to the topic I really wanted to dig into, and that was email itself. Like, running an email system, running a server for this. Like, again, without going through all the steps and like all the protocols and whatnot, but what were the unexpected challenges? What were the things you ran into? Like,
honestly, for me, none. So I built the first internet provider in Chattanooga, probably in the region. We were doing email on FidoNet and things like that. And I've been doing email for both other projects and this for, since 1994. So no real new challenges. DKIM is a new thing to set up, the domain keys, where you're signing your email with a public key. But I go back to SendMail and UUCP days. They're not much has changed. Email is one of the foundations of the internet. And once upon a time, all email servers handled email and relayed it for anybody until a few lawyers sent spam to everybody on the freaking planet. And then everybody locked down the mail servers. But we used to relay mail for all kinds of people. If you could find an open SMTP port 25, we'd take the mail and forward it on. Everybody did.
So the lawyers did destroy the internet.
Yes.
Not a myth.
Yes. I've forgotten their names. They're famous, but the first spam email, it was a group of lawyers.
Okay. So you said something just really interesting there, and I had it marked down to bring it up later in the conversation, but you already brought it up. You brought the internet to Chattanooga. That when you were introduced to me in person, that was what Dan said. The person who runs the DevOps days.
Me and some awesome friends put ASN 3901 on the internet. 3901 being the 3,901st network on the internet.
All right. I would just love to hear. And I know that's probably a much bigger story than we have time for today, but I'd love to hear like the highlight, condensed, like why.
I was lonely and talked to people online. I ran bulletin board services since the early 1980s. I'm old. And moved to Chattanooga in 89, set up a one-line BBS, became a two-line BBS, became a 4 and 6. Then we moved to QBBS, which is a popular multi-user BBS system. Ran 8 lines, added database capabilities to it, and provided property tax information to realtors and people in the property world for about a year and a half. And so that was daytime modem usage. We'd tie up 6, 7 phone lines all day long with that. But around 5, 6 o'clock at night, it'd drop off. And so we ran chat systems and forums and let people yell and scream at each other. And in the wild ways of the internet, no, it's not a lot different than Facebook, but at least we were a little more anonymous. All I knew was a phone number. This phone number called in. And that grew into an ISP. Early in '94, we were doing email via UUCP, Unix to Unix Copy Protocol. We were sending it, we were dialing out to California to send mail. We were receiving it back via a satellite connection via Planet Connect, which used to broadcast email. You want to talk about secure? Used to broadcast all of your email and NTP over satellite, and anybody with a dish and receiver could pick it up. There was no encryption. You could pick up everybody's email if you wanted to. Because they just broadcast everybody. And you'd put it on the BBS and people would get their email. And then that grew into, we had a commercial need. We did a lot of software development and had a commercial need to need an internet connection. And we bought a $3,000 a month, 128 kbit per second connection from Sprint on a fractional T1. And at that time, all of the University of Tennessee had a 64K connection. All three campuses shared a single 64K connection. They had 56K connections between the three that let them network between the three connections, Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Nashville.
That just sounds ridiculously slow. But I guess
it was.
It wasn't at a time when everybody had 4 devices connected to the internet at all.
There was no video. You logged on for 30 minutes and checked your email. The big thing we did was email. People paid $3 an hour for a Shell account. $3 an hour for a Shell account, and would log in and do a couple things online. Go for searches. Used to be able to search what was then the internet via email.
I mean, Lynx still works, but this is before Lynx.
Lynx still works, and eLinks and a bunch of others. But also, people would send. There were several services you could send a formatted email to, and they would go and do the searching on Gopher servers, and then email you back your results. Then you would click the link or pick the thing and ask, "Show me this," and it would email you back. I mean, these are the very early days on limited bandwidth of internet. And then Tim Berners-Lee basically invented HTML, and the idea is Tim Berners-Lee did 2 things. I think the second thing gets lost. Tim Berners-Lee thought that programs shouldn't just blow up when it encountered an error. Before that, anytime anything in the computer saw anything that it didn't understand, it'd just die. Tim Berners-Lee's real contribution to modern computer science was, if you don't do paragraph breaks, just skip it and keep going.
Huh.
And that was a godsend to the internet, was if you could have malformed HTML and your web browser did its best at what it could do. Still today, web browsers do the best that they can do, and sometimes they render differently.
I wonder if that had an impact on like PHP itself, because PHP, it's like one of the most forgiving languages.
Yeah.
As far as like, it might not do exactly what you wanted it to do, but it'll run. You can write it as one giant continuous line, and if it just doesn't parse something right, it's just going to do it.
It tries.
I wonder if that was directly influenced, because they're very much related.
But if you're old enough, things used to just break.
Huh.
I'm sorry, there was a carriage return there I didn't expect. Boomp. So we became an ISP. Al Gore effectively released the internet for October 1st, 1994, which is a Sunday, I think. And we came online publicly October 2nd, 1994. We were already there, but we hit the newspapers and all that we were open for business and all that as Chattanooga Online, which is our BBS name, and became an internet provider.
Okay, there's so many things I want to ask you about that and like dig in here, but you did make a comment there, and I think a lot of our listeners might have heard a meme version of this or a joke version that Al Gore released the internet or made the internet. Could you just give us some historical context on that one before we dig further?
So Al Gore was in the pocket of the tech bros at the time. Apple, Microsoft, everybody else, and not in a bad way, but Al Gore essentially championed allowing commercial traffic on the internet. Before that, the internet was all educational, military, and government. Its purposes were not for you to see cat videos. It was for a guy at MIT to talk to a guy at Berkeley to talk to a guy at the Department of Energy. That was the original purpose or the use of the internet. Maybe not the purpose, but that was the original use of the internet. And Al Gore effectively invented the internet by making it legal, or championed making it legal. I mean, one person doesn't do it, but he championed making it available for commercial use on October 1st, 1994. And we jokingly, say October 2nd, 1994, we were there. And to do that, I mean, you don't understand that at the time. Do you know what a radius server is? Remote authentication dial-in user service. At the time, you couldn't buy such a thing. It kind of existed, but we used things called Livingston Portmasters to handle modems and had to write our own radius server. There was a couple commercial variants out there, but they didn't really work for what we needed them to do, which is to do billing and account control. And so Billy, who's now at Red Hat, he's a major dude at Red Hat. Billy and I wrote a radius server in Perl. No, Dan Like and I wrote a radius server in Perl.
Wow. Oh, all right, man. We keep going down this rabbit hole. So.
There's lots of them.
I do have a question though related to government on that. Like, what kind of, at that point, was it just we bought a phone line and plugged it into a computer, or were there like government hurdles or any kind of regulation?
Almost no regulation. You did a peering agreement with your upstream internet provider. There were only a few what we would call tier ones then: a WorldCom, UUNet, AT&T, Sprint. There was a handful of places you could buy a real internet connection from, and then people like us resold. You're taking 1 meg per second and you split it into 100 people at some variation of that. Now, they don't all use all the bandwidth all the time. There wasn't video then, or not good video, and that was the business model. And then out of that came Mindspring out of Atlanta, U.S. Internet out of Knoxville. I mean, regionally, but us in Chattanooga, we actually had arguably 3 good internet providers in Chattanooga, and then we had 4 or 5 that were virtual. They were reselling somebody else's services and saying they were doing it. But we actually owned a building, data center, had colo. I had, at its peak, we had 2 DS3s and a 1 gig Ethernet connection. We actually located the business next to telco data centers. Here in Chattanooga, East Main and Central is the main internet feed. So Chattanooga has a weird position on the internet. Most of the internet goes on railroad right-of-way fiber, and Chattanooga is a railroad hub. Everybody's fiber goes really close to East Main and Central here in Chattanooga, which is where our data center was. We were able to tap directly into the other telcos using dark fiber. We ran our own fiber across the street. Bell South did not like that. There was fiber optic running sewer lines. There was fiber optic trenched along the ditch. I mean, we had fun.
You're literally building the internet by building the connections, fiber optic connections.
Well, and for example, Bell South wanted $6,000 a month to run what they understood was a DS3. They didn't understand much above that. OC3s and OC12s wasn't, completely over their head at the time. And they wanted $6,000 a month to run to run a DS3 from 800 East Main to 745 East Main across the street. We, one afternoon, made fiber happen. Saved $6,000 a month.
Smart planning.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a while, and to come back to originally brought you onto the show for, is one of the points you made in that talk was that we are living in a world of walled gardens now.
Yes.
And that was part of one of your inspirations for talking about running your own service.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because you've been since the very beginning with just bulletin board dial-in.
Yeah, and arguably a BBS was a walled garden, but had gateways to the outside world, and everybody followed standard procedures, standard protocols. FidoNet and tried to communicate. Not everybody, but the good ones did. And so what I watch in the current world is everything is a walled garden. Oh, WhatsApp me. Oh, you don't run WhatsApp? No, I don't want the Chinese to have access to my phone, or whatever you want to say. Oh, you can talk to me on TikTok. No, I don't have TikTok. I mean, those are walled gardens, and they're not open to anybody. Email, arguably, is the more open of the communications protocols. Text messaging is probably number two. Everybody with a phone can do text messages. Most people don't look at them, but the Facebook, LinkedIn, those are all walled gardens. And walled gardens now include things like Gmail, Yahoo, and Outlook because they are Microsoft, because they tend to not want to communicate outside those networks. And the reason they do, I mean, I've got clients who've got an Outlook and a Gmail account so that they can talk to people better who have got other Microsoft hosted stuff or Gmail hosted stuff because they communicate better. Those have become walled gardens and not interoperable.
So, what's the problem with walled gardens? I guess is the not trying to
Well,
be a controversial hot take here. Just
so I joke about this when people ask me, do I have an Android or an Apple? Well, my wife's Apple. She lives in the Apple ecosystem. Those are her digital overlords and feudal lords, and she's got to trust them. I am honestly on the Google side because I've got an Android phone and I've got a lot of stuff on Google and Gmail. But you are giving an awful lot of allegiance to those things, and sometimes they disappear. A lot of the Internet of Things type companies just vaporize, and you're left with a bunch of junk that was connected to a walled garden that isn't interoperable. You are communicating to an email account that you don't have control over, you don't own the domain or whatever, and they change their terms of service, and you're left hanging. Those walled gardens provide services for people who don't have technical skills, but if you have technical skills, you might want to create some of your own.
I mean that's very interesting because there was a time where you had to like there was
Mm-hmm.
weren't these providers, and I will admit I'm old enough to remember the early days of HTML, HTML1. If we still ran HTML1,
Still
everything would be a
works.
smartphone. Uh,
Yeah. But in the 90s, I didn't consider somebody a real geek if they didn't have a domain name and an IP address.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, I know exactly what you're
I
saying.
mean, and the geeks I know ran lastname.com or whatever, funnyname.com type email services, and their whole families were on it. And, their families and friends and everybody was on a mail server that they ran and they controlled. And that was the early days of the internet. The only thing you actually didn't own, you kind of leased domain names and IP addresses. And it's weird to me to be using professionally. I use a lot of Linode, Vultr, and DigitalOcean servers. It's weird to me to not be able to go put my hands on the machine. And I've been doing it for 20 years now, running hosted services off of big hosting providers. But I used to be able to walk over the machine and go, "Here's my mail server."
I know.
Here's my web server. Physically put my hands on the hard drive. The world has become a place of revenue creation opportunities, and the golden goal is recurring automated revenue. And I'm guilty. I am living well because I own a voice over IP telephone company that is automated recurring revenue.
Right on. Right on.
So there's good to it, but if you've got a choice, don't.
Fair enough. So, like, what other kind of services do you think are reasonable to run? Like, mail makes a lot of sense if you have the use case
Yeah.
for it. But like, what else could you be running?
If you have a use case for it, I run my own DNS service for some things. I have things that require a domain name for their SSL certificates to work, and those IP addresses change. And so I have to have automatic updating forward DNS that says that this domain name goes to this IP address and the certs match that domain name. It's a wild card. And so running your own bind server is again one of those basic foundational blocks of the internet. And DNS used to be distributed. Yeah, Cloudflare does it. Everybody uses Google at 8.8.8.8 and all that. But you can also run your own DNS. And by the way, a lot of these things I'm talking about are essential when you're a developing country. Part of part of my past is building utility smart grid communication systems, whatever you want to call them, for utilities in developing countries. And you've got to build your own. There isn't enough bandwidth in Benin, West Africa, to use Google for everything. It needs to be local, or as local as you can get it. But DNS is the next one I would say is important to have. If you're doing real work, you might want to have a domain, a secondary domain even, that you're running the control of. And one of the reasons is the NS update commands are really easy to script updates to. So if I want to create a DNS entry, I don't go to a web interface and do that. I actually write a little command file that updates bind and run NS update and my magic key and run this file, and it deletes and creates and does all that type of stuff really quickly. Next, I can argue build your own framework for web stuff, but that's a religious a religious problem.
That's how we ended up with so many JavaScript frameworks. I think everybody's like, I'm just going to build this better, and they just built them up.
Again, why do you need a framework for JavaScript? But that's a whole nother story.
It's a whole rabbit hole. We can avoid that one.
I can congratulate the modern web browsers is that I no longer need jQuery to run most of my internet, my JavaScript. The browsers are doing a really nice job with CSS and JavaScript and tend to be fairly consistent across them.
Well, I mean, HTML5 and CSS3 were huge step ups. Yeah. I mean, again, we're starting to sound like we've been around for a while. So say things like that. Yeah.
Get off my lawn.
Did you see that demo a few years ago that somebody made a full blown animation just in CSS?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. We really don't need as much JavaScript to do it. Ethan Marcotte, the father of responsive design, hates JavaScript.
Yeah.
He makes his developers work without it first, and if they can make a functional website that looks good without it, then he'll let them sprinkle it on top.
I'm doing rotated, please wait, and those types of things in CSS only.
All right, on.
Yeah,
and that loads on everything.
Yeah, it does. Even phones, which is very cross-platform.
This wasn't a prepared question, but I gotta ask. I have had this conversation a number of times over my life. What's your gut feeling on GNU Mailman?
I wrote my own mail server, mailing list server because of it. I love it. It's awesome, but it's got its own it's got its own quirks. And for running the couple mailing lists that I wanted to run, a couple of them are all PGP or GPG encrypted email. Mailman doesn't do that type of stuff really well. And I don't like using other people's tools. So I wrote Melee, the mailing list engine. It's on geeklabs.com. It's terrible, but it runs 3 mailing lists really well. and does PGP, which Mailman didn't do.
Right on. So that's, I had worked with Mailman a couple different times in my life, and I'm right there with you. There's some things pretty straightforward and others not so well. Anyway, just
you can replace it in 2 PHP scripts and 1 single table MySQL.
See, there you go. And you want to get that level of granularity to own your own stuff. That's how granular you can get with it. And I like that. So we're approaching the end of the show here, and it's time to move on to what has become the crowd favorite part of our discussions, which is the get to know you segment. The guest security retro. So we ask 4 questions of all our guests. So we'll start with the technical one. What's your favorite security command line tool?
I use probably daily IPTraf. I do an awful lot of remote system administration of both phone equipment and things that are behind firewalls at sites. I also involved in some medical VPN type stuff. And the ability to pop in a shell and run IPTraf on site and see that what I typically see is, oh gosh, this IP address is broadcasting all kinds of shit everywhere and scanning everything and all that. And IPTraf goes, that's the culprit really quickly and you go find that somebody brought a laptop in from their Thailand overseas trip that got compromised, or wherever they got it, and it's just being a mean, nasty thing. Sniff it for debugging. I don't do much Wireshark level sniffing, but the ability to pull up Sniff It, it's a really crude, old-fashioned sniffer, Ethernet sniffer. Both provides a nice command line interface, but also will write out log files really well. I can do the command line stuff for Sniff It in my head because I've been using it so much. And again, if I'm looking for traffic patterns, I can be shelled into a remote machine and run Sniff It really easily, see it, analyze it, grep it, edit the files and all that right there on the system. So I use those daily.
Right on. So next question, and you've been a person who you run your own companies, you've hired many people over the years. Yeah. What is the go-to question when you are hiring for a security position?
So for any technical position, my intro question is, what is your favorite text editor? And my reason to ask that question is it gives me an insight into where they live, GUI or command line, which operating system, and how much assistance they like. And my worst answer ever was a young lady whose answer was literally, I'm going to kind of mimic her, was, whatever editor you want me to use. And that was the non-answer. That was the worst possible answer. But I love it when people go, well, I like blah, 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 or Emacs or BB Edit or whatever, but I can use Vi if I have to, or, then you get Vi users and whatever. But, and for the record, I use Joe because I'm an old WordStar guy.
Wow.
Yeah. I've been using the same text editor for 30 some years. But that's my first opening question. And even non-technical people have a favorite text editor. Notepad.
I know. I am honestly spread between, not that you're hiring me, but I'm spread between like VS Code, Sublime. If I'm in a system, I'll just drop into Vim.
Yeah, okay. And Vim would be the answer I'm looking for. The fact that you can do Vim makes you very useful.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a master of Vim, but I wrote a whole website in Vim from scratch just to see if I could do it, and I'll never do it again.
But if you were shelled into a broken system and you needed to edit a text file and the only thing that was available was Vim or Vi, you could do it.
Yeah.
Nano, Pico, etc. Those are tools.
Mm-hmm. I did hear a really compelling argument for Emacs once because you can open onto extremely large documents.
Joe will also edit extremely large documents and binary files. It does paging memory. But the cool thing about Emacs is it's almost its own operating system. And I can't use it. It's just too complicated. If I were to live in the programming world, I'd live in Emacs, but I don't live there.
Fair enough. All right. Let's move on to the final two. These are the big questions that we ask everybody. What is the best advice and the worst advice you've ever heard in security? So we'll start with the good. What's the best advice in security you've ever heard or you've ever given?
Don't trust anybody. I mean, I don't have any really relevant good advice other than just being paranoid. I mean, I've had a lot of bad advice out there, but not a lot of good advice.
Oh no, being paranoid is pretty good. Doesn't double checking things, making sure you actually followed the processes and procedures properly. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with being cautious.
And even questioning, how much am I exposing here on this security podcast with a bunch of security research that are going to go bang on me? I get banged on. I've got servers that get banged on all day long by foreign nationals. Have fun.
Right on. So let's move on to the worst advice, because it sounds like you have heard a good amount of bad advice out there.
Oh, gosh, yes. The worst advice I've ever heard consistently more than once when I was doing utility information systems was always from PricewaterhouseCoopers. They would come in and do audits, and literally my favorite was, well, here's the script. You have to run this script to audit your server. Well, that's a script specifically for Red Hat. This is a Debian system. We don't care. You have to run this script. And I would rewrite the script to run for Debian and give them insane amounts of very detailed results, and it would, over their head. But also rotating passwords and all that type of stuff that they would come up with. Almost everything bad I've ever heard came from a PwC auditor.
Audits drive so much of the security conversation, and even though we all know compliance is not security, you have to
Right.
have compliance.
But I would argue, they go, well, you got to rotate passwords. And I take them out to where the cashiers for the utility would be, and I'd go, come on, let's go find the passwords, and you would find the little stack of Post-it notes with passwords on them. Because when you're rotating passwords all the time, you've got to write them down.
Really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you taking the time today and being with us and sharing your knowledge and history. We didn't talk an awful lot about security, so I'll leave it to you at the end here. Do you have any parting words, especially around the world of security or anything you've learned over your life? Just wisdom.
When you're bored, don't watch TV. Go tail your log files raw, not through Splunk and all the things that filter them that you're paying for. Go tail raw log files or journal control space-F. You always learn things.
Always be learning. I definitely agree with you. TV isn't terrible here in small doses, but yeah, if you're that bored, you could definitely be learning something.
Tail your log files and watch TV. It's okay.
Oh, okay. There you go. That'll be in the promo clip. Tail your log files and watch TV. But thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And, hopefully I'll see you again at maybe next year for Chattanooga DevOps Days again.
Cool.
All right.